Clashes in Khartoum, Code Pink gets the boot, and Islamic terrorism spreads across Africa. Not only that, but we'll honor a fallen hero. That's coming up on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, it's Chuck Holton here. Thanks for being with us today on the Hot Zone. I just want to take a minute and just remember my friend Shaheen Nazdar. Now, Shaheen was our translator back in November 2016 when we went to Iraq to see the fight against ISIS. And he took us to Sinjar, he took us to see some mass graves, and told us about his people, the Yazidis, who had been so just genocidally persecuted by ISIS. And he was working with the Free Burma Rangers. About 6 months after we were there with Shaheen, Shaheen was shot saving a little girl's life. He was trying to save a little girl who had been shot by ISIS, her father as well, and Shaheen was shot in the stomach. He went to the hospital. We thought he was going to survive, but unfortunately he perished. And I just want to take a minute and show you a few short clips of my time with Shaheen. He was such a special guy.
On my last trip to Iraq in November 2015, the Kurdish Peshmerga forces were massing to retake the city of Sinjar, which had been captured by ISIS in August 2014. We watched as U.S. aircraft pounded the city in advance of the operation, and when the Peshmerga entered the town on November 13th, the Islamic State had already retreated, and the Kurds faced very little resistance. But the damage had been done. ISIS completely razed the city, carrying away anything of value and destroying almost everything that was left. CBN was given rare access to explore this ruined landscape. What we saw was absolutely chilling. Many homes have been reduced to rubble. Those still standing look like this. What was once a city of 500,000 now sits silent and empty.
This is one of many tunnels that were found underneath the city of Sinjar after the Peshmerga took over from ISIS. ISIS dug these tunnels so that they could move around the city without being observed, and they ran communications cables, there's network cables, there's overhead cover, everything they need, and not all of these have been cleared yet from mines and other IEDs. So this is where the tunnels come out inside of these homes, which are now, as you can see, absolutely destroyed. This one looks like it might have got hit by a bomb or something. And this has been cleared, but many of these houses are still wired up with IEDs. And so we have to be very careful where we go here, and who knows how long it'll take before the people can come back and try to rebuild their lives. You know, if you ever heard of the city of Stalingrad in World War II, this is what I imagine it looking like. Look at this. Everything just collapsed, destroyed. It's just a wrecked and shattered city. This just goes to show that ISIS only comes to kill and steal and destroy, just like someone else we know.
Sinjar is a land of shattered dreams right now. Everything is destroyed.
Our interpreter, Shaheen Nazdar, is a Yazidi who fought ISIS as his people fled Sinjar in August 2014.
Here in Sinjar, ISIS captured more than 6,000. They killed a lot of people, and right now still there's 3,800 in ISIS captivity. We don't know if they are alive or they are being killed.
You might wonder what happened to the 500,000 people who lived here. Many were able to escape to the safety of Mount Sinjar. Some still live there today. Those less fortunate were captured by ISIS, and it's only now becoming apparent the scale of brutality those poor souls faced. Mass graves like this one are being found all over the area, where perhaps thousands of Yazidi men, women, and children were executed and left to rot.
Right now we are in one mass grave in Sinjar. More than 20 mass graves been found out in Sinjar. Also, the number of mass graves right now in Sinjar is more than the number of the family right now in Sinjar city.
This photo taken from Mount Sinjar at night tells the story. The city of Sinjar is here. This is the new front line established by the Peshmerga in November 2015. One of their objectives was to cut off Highway 47, here, which was being used by ISIS to supply Mosul. These lights beyond are villages still under the control of ISIS, where many of the more than 3,000 Yazidis taken hostage are still being held. Red lights are vehicular traffic moving mostly towards Syria, which gives an indication that the Islamic State is pillaging anything of value from Iraq's second-largest city, in advance of the Iraqi government's planned operation to retake Mosul later this year.
ISIS not been stopped because they still moving between Syria and Iraq. All night we saw their trucks, their convoy go and back. No airstrike, nothing. They are free.
In the meantime, the people who once lived here continue to hope that their loved ones held captive will someday be returned.
I think America have good, great army, but they don't using for this evil ISIS. For what is this army?
From Sinjar in northern Iraq, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
So I'm told that Shaheen gave his life to Christ before he died, and I cling to that hope because I really plan on someday bowing before the throne alongside my good friend Shaheen Nazdar. So Shaheen, until then, rest in peace. Okay, let's talk about what's happening at the Venezuelan embassy. Last week, I reported on the fact that there were Code Pink protesters who had taken over the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. They were camped out in there and saying they weren't going to leave because the United States has recognized Juan Guaido as the legitimate president of Venezuela. And so they kicked out the diplomats who belonged to Maduro and wanted to install diplomats from Juan Guaido's administration. Code Pink agrees with Maduro. They prefer socialism over capitalism, apparently. And so they went in and took over the embassy. But a bunch of Venezuelan protesters went and counter-protested Code Pink, circling the embassy and basically shutting it off from outside help. So there were Code Pink protesters outside trying to throw food over the lines of blockade from the Venezuelan protesters to get into their friends. Just a couple days ago, about 4 days ago, the power was shut off to the embassy, so that complicated matters even further. Well, yesterday, as in Monday night, these protesters received an eviction notice, a formal eviction notice. Listen to what some of the people outside the embassy had to say after that happened.
Okay, we're here at the Venezuelan embassy. The police serve the activists who have been staying inside the embassy for over a month. They were served with an eviction notice and they were told to leave the building immediately. We talked to some of the activists and they said that they will not leave the building voluntarily. So there is a lot of people, mostly Venezuelan immigrants, outside the building, both of my sides, and they're waiting here with a lot of expectation for the police officers who are behind me to go inside the building and arrest the activist who doesn't want to leave. The Venezuelan ambassador to the Organization of American States, Gustavo Tarre, told us a few minutes ago that after the eviction notice was served, 3 activists left the building and only 4 remain inside. Maybe a month ago, there was in the peak, the higher amount of activists who were sleeping inside. My understanding is that was about 30. That was maybe 3 weeks ago. And but after the power was cut off last Friday, several activists have been leaving the building because the conditions inside have deteriorated understandably after the power was cut. And today, a few hours ago, the Venezuelan ambassador to Washington, Carlos Vecchio, announced via Twitter and in a press release that the authorities had served an eviction notice to the activists. So we're here. It's past 11 p.m. here in Washington local time, and there is a lot of people. The police blocked the access to the street. There is no car traffic. So there is a lot of people, a lot of anxiety, a lot of expectation here. And Tarre told us that he expects the building to be cleared out soon, he said, but we don't have a sense of timing, so we're all waiting here as everybody else.
So hopefully by the time you see this on Wednesday morning, the protest will be over because the people will have been evicted, taken out of the embassy. But as of right now, as I'm recording this, there are still 4 people, pink protesters in the embassy refusing to leave. They're going to have to get dragged out of there in handcuffs, most likely. There's already been some minor violence and skirmishes between the 2 groups of protesters out there. Let's hope that it all can be resolved peacefully and that very soon Juan Guaido's administration will be rightfully installed not only in the American embassy but in the embassies around the world. So let's go on to what's happening in Africa. We're seeing a wave of killings across Africa happening, and almost all of them have to do with religiously motivated violence. That is, Al-Qaeda and other Islamic jihadist groups that are moving across Africa and taking over vast swaths of the continent. We've seen groups like Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, like Masina Liberation Front, and that's in Burkina Faso, Ansar al-Din, Al-Shabaab, and many others across Africa. And this is a very concerning trend because as the United States has fought hard to push Al-Qaeda and their affiliates, including the Islamic State, out of Iraq, out of Syria, out of Afghanistan, they are still spreading into the places that the United States is not. And one of the ways that they're doing that is by coming into very poor countries in Africa. They're well funded by Saudi benefactors or things like that, coming in and saying, hey, there's no school in your little village here. We're going to build a school for you. Aren't we nice? The only caveat is that in order for your children to go to school, they also have to go to the mosque that we're building next to the school, and so do you. And so they're sort of converting almost by force vast swaths of Africa, and this is extremely concerning. We're seeing groups like Boko Haram, we're seeing groups like Al-Shabaab, we're seeing groups like Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb that are murdering their way across Africa, and this is going to have to be dealt with sooner rather than later. The United States already has a fairly sizable presence across Africa, but it's such a big continent that we're very spread out. We've got thousands of troops in places like Djibouti. We got troops in Somalia. We've got troops in Liberia and other places. But Africa has always been a mess, and it probably always will be a mess. And the bottom line is that it's going to have to be dealt with, or we risk having to really commit hundreds of thousands of troops to this effort. And so the military is trying to do that in many different ways. One of the ways that they've done that is by trying to apply some preventative medicine, so to speak, by sending medical teams from the military into various places around Africa and doing what they call med caps. That is, helping make people healthier. Because, as you might not know, the vast majority of people in Africa have parasites. They suffer from parasites. And so these med caps are helping to rid these people of parasites, which makes them happier, more able to work, more able to be productive. And in the long run, hopefully that will keep people from wanting to join Al-Qaeda or one of these affiliates. Now, speaking of terrorist groups, let's talk about the government in Sudan. Over the last couple of days, we've seen some serious violence erupt in Khartoum.
To talk about this a little more, I'd like to bring in my good friend, Ryan Boyette.
Tell us a little bit about what happened yesterday over there. What are you hearing from your people on the ground?
So last night I was at home and I started getting a ton of messages on my phone from different people and different sources in Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. And so the protests have been continuing, getting larger and larger by the day, trying to throw out the military council that has taken over power since Bashir has left. And there was a moment in which a militia force that's called the Rapid Support Force kind of lined up, and it seemed that they had been given orders because they kind of took formation against the protesters. And it was kind of this, you could see there was a lot of tension. And that was yesterday afternoon. Well, at about 7 o'clock Sudan time, guns started going off. People started running, and it was chaos. The Rapid Support Force unloaded into a crowd of thousands of protesters. I had a friend, an American journalist, who was in the hospital. He said that one hospital received over 60, and there are 3 hospitals that received similar number. So there's over 100 wounded. The death toll is not quite known yet, but they're saying about 6. But from photos and videos I've seen, it seems that there's more than that.
Wow. So what do you think caused them to suddenly open fire on these protesters? The protesters have been there out in front of the military barracks for months, right?
Yes, and that's the difference. What we have here is a Rapid Support Force is part of the national security, where you have the Sudan Armed Forces, the mid-level officers and the lower-level enlisted men were standing on the side of the protesters for the most part. So you had this Rapid Support Force who has been under the control of a man named Humeti, who's the vice president right now of the military council. Now, I know that gets complicated, but this man has done tremendous amount of war crimes in the Nuba Mountains, Blue Nile, and in Darfur. And so right now, he's sitting on this military council that's supposed to be ruling the country, which a lot of people are not happy about. And
Yeah,
so
I heard that people aren't happy about that. So are they in talks to go to a civilian-led government, or what?
So they were having talks between the military council and a group of from the protesters that were kind of appointed to go into these talks, and it seemed like things were moving in a good direction, a little bit closer towards civil rule, and maybe that's why Humeti ordered his men to shoot into the crowd, because he realized he would be losing power in that situation. That is, I'm speculating there. I don't know that for sure, but what is true is that the Rapid Support Force did fire into thousands of protesters, unarmed protesters.
Well, it seems like, if anything, this has just animated the protesters even more. I see now where they're piling up big mounds of rocks in the middle of the road, and they're even more determined to stay. It may have backfired on him then. Do you think so?
Yeah, I think it did. The people, amazingly, a few hours after the attack, hundreds and thousands of more protesters flooded to the streets and started walking to where they're having the sit-in in front of the armed forces barracks, and they were chanting, "Where is death? Death is ahead. We are ready to die. We're coming for death."
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, here's a kind of an unrelated question. Tell me about I'm seeing in a lot of places in Western Africa, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Nigeria, and Cameroon, lots of jihadi-inspired violence, especially against Christians. I know that the Sudan government has been designated as a state sponsor of terror, that there's a lot of jihadist groups in Sudan. Does that have anything to do with all this that's going on?
Well, I think the behind the scene elements that are kind of pushing toward violence and kind of spiraling this down into a lot of chaos and keeping the military council in power is a lot of radicalism. And we have radical Islamists are pushing that agenda, where you have the protesters who most of them are Muslims, but they're very open in wanting to have these protests be very inclusive of all religions, including Christianity, including all ethnicities, including all political parties. So I think what we have, there's no front runner in the protest that's kind of saying, "I'm going to be the man," or no political party saying, "We're going to be the party." It's very inclusive of everyone on the side of the protesters.
That's great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for explaining that to us. It's nice to have an expert on call when we need it. And
Yeah, thanks, Chuck.
if any other developments, we'll come back to you. Thanks again, Ryan. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks.
God bless you.
God bless.
All right, so that's all we've got for the Hot Zone today, folks. Thanks for being a part of it. And I really hope you'll like and share this podcast wherever you happen to be consuming it. If you are listening to the podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud or Podbean, I would encourage you to go and watch it on YouTube or on OpsLens TV, because there's so much more that's being added to the podcast in the way of video that I think you would really get a lot more out of it if you have the time to do that. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing the Hot Zone. I'm Chuck Holton. We'll see you tomorrow.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.